Hey Jim, I've been practicing since you've been gone. You ready? Distributor, distributor, distributor. Nah, I still can't say the word properly. I'm Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
This is the Kayfabe Weekly Shoot for the weekend of
February 1st.
I had you on your toes, man, because you've been away from the camera for quite a while, man. It's good to have you back, Jim. You went to Angoulême Comic Festival.
First time, fantastic.
I consider you to be a hardworking guy, and you always have a few irons in the fire, as they say. So when you're up there in the sky, captive audience, do you take that moment to watch shitty movies that you would never otherwise watch if your feet were touching the dirt?
Absolutely, yes, I do.
I want to hear names. I want to hear titles.
The one on the way over was Night School, Kevin Hart and Tiffany Haddish.
I heard about that on The Breakfast Club.
Very fun. And then I split time with editing. So on the ride over, it was that and editing cartoonist Kayfabe. I love to edit on planes. Used to edit the podcast. It's great. What else are you going to do?
See what I mean, guys?
On the way home, I watched Uncle Drew, and also Tiffany Haddish. It's the basketball. Shaq's in it, Kyrie Irving.
She's on fire.
It's fantastic. I enjoyed it very much. And also the Mr. Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Big Oscar snub this year.
Very fun, very good movie. Very enjoyable. Interesting to see kind of what goes into that show, his thinking behind making that show.
Your feet touch down in France and you're in gay Paris.
Did mostly tourist stuff in Paris. Went with my wife. So got in, checked into the hotel, didn't sleep on the plane ride over there, so slept for an hour, and then we just went out and did tourist stuff for a couple of days. Everything you would expect, Louvre, Notre Dame. The churches are magnificent. So some of the highlight churches, we went to Sacred Heart, just beautiful. It's up on a hill. It was the best weather day. We're standing outside looking around. It's magnificent. You can see Paris forever. And some dude proposes to his girlfriend on the steps, like right beside us in front of the church. She said yes. Natalie was super excited, clapping. Only person that responded, by the way. So that went away quickly, but that was nice. It's amazing to me, those churches. And then the other one we saw was Saint Chapelle, and it has like the stained glass windows that go the whole way around the cathedral. And each one is like a book of the Bible or a story from the Bible. And it has instructions on how to read it, and it reminded me a little bit of Brian Chippendale because some of the windows, they would have like rows of stained glass within these very tall columns. So it might be like 5 rows that would read basically like panels. And some of them would read in snake fashion. Like
That's Brian Chippendale.
Yeah, exactly. So that was pretty fantastic. I've seen comics about how the stained glass is like early sequential storytelling, for a population that was illiterate and for a sermon that was in Latin, you would look at these images. And so it was pretty neat to see that. Visited a couple of comic book stores. Album, I asked people for recommendations of which stores to visit. Thank you, Kayfabers, for coming through on that. Album was one that was recommended. I found our work in all the stores I went to. Album was one of the nicest, biggest stores. Your work was displayed prominently next to 2 copies of Fuckator, Fantagraphics Underground book that I edited by Jason Carnes.
Awesome.
So I was impressed to see that. Thought about buying those and bringing them back because they're kind of hard to find. And then the second one, the one that everybody said to go to, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's like Apom Bapom, something along those lines. And we get there, and I think 2 people are doing drugs, like at the next building. They're giggling and like bent over smoking something. Kind of weird. But found Street Angel in the window. So that's a pretty good sign.
They knew you were coming, man.
Man, it was a great store.
Might be fans of the show.
Hip Hop Family Tree poster on the wall inside.
Yeah, man, my publishers out there, they live within walking distance of these shops, and they could pound the pavement with ease.
Yeah, it was quite a scene. I mean, you've been there. Comics are celebrated in France. I've heard that, and finally to get to see that was fantastic.
I saw your photos inside the catacombs with the skulls and all that, and it reminded me of this. There's a legendary internet photo. Do you know the legendary internet? Like, Kayfabers out there, I know some of you were there, man, in 2006, 2007, when there was, it would be breaking rule number 1 and 2 of this forum to mention the name of said forum, but some guy puts a post up there, hey guys, if I jack one of these skulls out of the catacombs, do you think that customs is gonna find out and give me a hard time? So they start putting the battery in his back to jack one, and I'm sorry if this is one of your ancestors or whatever. So he jacks a skull, and his initial photo was like the one that you took at the catacombs. And then there's a photo in his hotel room with a fucking skull. So people start putting the battery in his back about like, well, because he's like, well, what do I do now? He does put his dick inside every orifice of the skull. Once again, I'm sorry. If this was one of your ancestors, I do apologize, but it did happen. And the photo that you initially took at the catacombs, eerily close to that very famous internet post.
The catacombs were something else. We waited in line for those. The weather was cold there, so it was kind of like, should we do this or not? And I'm very glad we did.
You make it to Angoulême. Did you see any friends out there?
Yeah, I saw quite a few. Chuck Forsman, Melissa Mendez, who has a strip running in Chicago Reader now.
Melissa does?
Just started, along with John Porcellino has one. So I don't know if they've retooled their comics page or what, but it's pretty exciting. I know that's a big deal to John. Melissa was very excited about it. You can obviously read those, find those online. So that was pretty cool. Ron Wimberly, got to hang out with him.
He's there every year.
Yeah. He's very international. So it was good to catch up with him. Man, I'm going to forget names, but Laura Park was there. Noah, talked to Noah. Yeah. He had a big fan of Bukowski. His publisher had a giant fan of Bukowski, like close-up headshot at the booth. It must have been like 6 feet tall. And all I could think was like, man, take pictures of Noah in front of that thing. Because I feel like he's kind of has a cantankerous rap, disposition.
He read one too many Robert Crumb interviews. Noah, knock it off, man.
But I thought there's no way he can do that standing in front of this giant piece of his artwork.
But you also don't want to turn into a Don Rosa who reminds everybody that you're famous in France.
That's true. They were there. A lot of American cartoonists had gone there for a residency, the PFC. I had done that in Minneapolis several years ago. It's like half European, half American cartoonists basically locked in a room for a week making comics.
I think that's what Noah was there for.
Yeah. So he said that was fantastic. Karen Katz has been there. I talked to her for a little bit. She's been there for one of the longer residencies. I guess Angoulême offers residencies. Jason Shiga, I saw him. I think he's been doing one of the residencies there.
He was doing like extremely long, like not that, but like something way bigger that was like a year long when I was there in 2017. So, there are those people in comics in the art community who know about grants and like will fucking use every single one of those opportunities to like, go to the Bahamas or whatever the fuck.
Saw fellow Pittsburgh cartoonist Frank Santoro's there with his publisher pushing his book. It's fantastic. You've been there. It's as advertised. Reminds you of Hicksville a little bit. It's just a comics town. So the town's beautiful. Just walking around is fantastic. You get a break or need to go to a different tent.
It's like Castlevania.
Yeah, it kind of is. I got there a day before the show started. Stayed with Ad House Books publisher Chris Pitzer. He had found an Airbnb that was basically this farm chateau about 2 kilometers out of town. That was beautiful, amazing. The caretaker would build a fire for us whenever we would text it. We were like, okay, we're on our way back. Get there and it'd be nice and warm and cozy. So that place was really great. Hartley Lynn, a.k.a. Ethan Riley of Pope Hats and Young Francis, stayed with us. One of the highlights of my trip was hanging out with those guys when we got back to the place and looking at Hartley's next book, In Progress.
He was working out there?
He had it with him, it's on his laptop. So we were just kind of talking about it, and somehow he starts showing certain pieces, and that's my favorite. You know what I mean? Actually making comics late at night after a day spent at an awesome festival. So we got there a day early, got to go see some of the exhibitions before they opened to the public. So the big ones that we saw were Richard Corbin and Taiyo Matsumoto were both in the same building, different floors. Probably the 2 best comic art exhibitions I've ever seen.
We saw Matsumoto's, there was an exhibition at TCAF a couple years back. Was the layout more interesting here?
If you remember the one in TCAF, it was organized, basically a wall would be dedicated to one work.
Yes.
This one, everything was kind of together, and there was a lot more here. I think there were a couple of works represented here that weren't at the TCAF. Whenever we checked in with our badges, I forgot to mention the Beguiling was there. Chris Butcher, Andrew, and Peter.
Awesome.
So talked to them a little bit. Chris recommended I go see, there was a Batman 80th anniversary show that was a little bit further out. Recommended that I go see that since we do this show on trash comics.
Did he say it that way?
So that was fun. I would see those guys throughout the weekend. I ran into Peter after he had seen the Batman exhibition. And he said I probably didn't have to see it. There were, I think the highlight were Neil Adams originals in that show, which would be great to see. But like there was a Frank Miller and Jim Lee, but they were just sketches. They weren't pages from an actual book. And they had recreated the Batcave was the big draw. So, Peter being part of TCAF said it's good for him to see that kind of a show, see how they put together an exhibition or an exhibition hall like that. So it was a spectacle, but it was further away. You had to take a bus to that, and I didn't make it to that show. I didn't make it to the BD Museum that's there in town, and I hear their permanent collection is amazing. Unfortunately, I didn't make it to that.
Only so many hours in a day.
It's such a big show, but the Corbin exhibition was beautiful because whoever put it together, they put it on. They would have like walls, like vertical walls, installed that they could hang additional art on, and those would have color gradients in the background. And then imagine his black and white art in front of it. And the color gradients, it's like evocative of his airbrush art. And then the black and white art in front of that just really popped. It was gorgeous. They must have had more art than they had space for because some of it bled into another floor where art was hung amongst exhibitions or amongst like permanent collection, like artifacts and various things. And it fit pretty well, like Richard Corbin art sort of works next to a skull of, a dinosaur or something or an old axe or stone tool. So all of that was really amazing. The Matsumoto stuff was incredible. And this is probably as good a time as any.
You picked up some things out there?
I picked up the Matsumoto book for you. So that's your copy.
Oh, thanks, man. This is from the show.
It is from the exhibition. It's all in French, unfortunately for my stupid ass. But the reproduction of the artwork is gorgeous.
Yeah, this is awesome. Check out some of this stuff. Might be a little too white, a little too hot for the lights we have. Jim, thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I picked up a few things. This one is Charles Burns' Vortex, published by Cornelius. It's not published in North America yet, and this one is in English, but it's, I'm a big Charles Burns fan. It shows a lot of his short pieces, illustrations, anthology pieces, things that I've seen snippets of, but rarely actually get to see in person. So this was a chance to kind of, basically get a Charles Burns book that is usually hard to come by in the States. I feel like this stuff appears online, and unless you order it from some international distributor, it goes away very quickly. So
you were out there for a couple weeks, basically. When you got back, did you get any cool mail from Kayfabers or any comics orders or anything like that?
Yes, the Kayfabe chickens came home to roost.
Awesome.
Any of the longtime viewers of our show remembers I've been looking for a Bill Sienkiewicz Elektra Assassin poster that I wasn't sure if I had dreamt of as a child or if it was real. And so I came home to find this waiting for me.
That's awesome, man.
And it's a little bit hot as well, but it's that iconic cover art from Elektra Assassin #1, 1986 cover date. That's a significant year for me as a comics fan. And I'm very excited to hang this on my wall.
That's gorgeous.
And a big thanks to Dave Howlett for finding this and sending it to me. And thank you very much, Dave. Really appreciate it. Yeah, another piece that came this week, Patrick Ian Rooks, who we know from Heroes Con. He makes mini comics. He sent a package with his latest mini comic with copies for all of us, including Tom. This will be your copy, but people that are unfamiliar with his work, he prints on newsprint, which is near and dear to my heart. And we've known him for a couple of years, so it's been interesting to watch him evolve over time. So this is for you.
Awesome.
He also sent one for Tom.
He's of, the next generation of cartoonists, but he speaks our language.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm very hard on that boy too, man, because I give anybody out there who makes comics, I give you 100% props until you're 25. Like when you're a young 20-something, man, you have all of this possibility of like partying, getting in trouble, doing knucklehead shit. But if you sit down and you make fucking comics, you get 100% props from me. He's approaching that 25-year period where I'm gonna actually start to be critical and be like, listen, man, let's talk comics for a minute. You know what I'm saying? So he's about to hit that next level.
Gotcha.
Convention season is going to begin pretty shortly. I'm not doing anything until X-Men is finished. We'll talk about our progress and status updates with our projects in a little bit, but two confirmations that we did make are Heroes Convention in mid-June. We'll give more details on that as time gets closer. And Small Press Expo in Bethesda, Maryland in like mid-September. Two very different kinds of shows, but two very comic-centric shows. And now that we have this platform here, I'm going to utilize these opportunities like for our show. So I'm going to do my best to get as many cool interviews at these places as possible. You know, at Heroes, I'll be at the table for most of the day, and afterwards, we'll see how everybody's feeling and then get some interviews that way. But at SPX, I'll have a couple of signings that I'll do each day, maybe 2 signings a day, but I'll have downtime the rest of the time. And a lot of those other guests will be in that same situation where they're not trying to sit behind a table all day, and I'll be able to strike and get a bunch of cool interviews from every spectrum of comics, essentially. Of course, we're going to have interviews with people we give a shit about. Like I'm going to be walking by Scott Snyder to get like a Tim Vigil interview or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care about that stuff. It'll be cool.
So news broke yesterday, I believe, that longtime comics retailer St. Mark's is closing.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I think they've been around 35 years or so. Iconic, classic store in a classic location, and I think part of the reason they're closing is because that classic location has changed quite a bit.
Since we've been there, must have, man, because what you were saying about the people in France doing drugs at the comic shop, like when you and I went to TCAF that year, it might have been 2000.
Mocha.
Oh, excuse me, Mocha. 2004, 5 maybe. Whenever we would hang out with our New York friends there, and they would ask, "Hey, where are you guys staying?" And we were like, "Oh yeah, we're at this St. Mark's hotel." And they were like, "Really?"
That was one of the shadier places I've slept in my life.
In my entire life, man. One of the people cleaned our room, stole my prescription drugs, which were just stomach pills. But
I don't think I remember that.
yeah,
I remember getting 2 parking tickets for. TCAF had been like a week or 2 before, and I got a parking ticket there also, and it was like $30, and I ran down the parking ticket lady. I saw her doing it. I was in a building and was like, "Oh no, I can move my car, whatever." And she's like, "Oh, it's no big deal. You don't even have to pay it." And it's like, I want to come back to Canada. Totally cool about it. I got 2 in New York, and it was like $250.
Yes, like
that hurts for an indie cartoonist.
But we were across the street from St. Mark's Comics, and at the time you had to walk past the straight up heroin junkies who were shooting up right in front of your face, man. You see people walking up and down the street like Night of the Living Baseheads, man, with the tracks in the arms and all of that shit. So you walk past them, getting to St. Mark's Comics. I still remember what I picked up. I got a copy of Two-Fisted Zombies, the first Rick Veitch published comic that I was on the hunt for my entire teenage life, man, and I found it there for like cover price, man. So it'll always have a special place in my heart for that alone.
Yeah, I think it was one of those stores with that old comic store spirit, you know, compared to a lot of the glitzier, more cleaned up comic book stores that are kind of the norm now. St. Mark's was like what I dream of comic book stores, where you would find old comics, you know, mingling with new stuff, things at cover price that you have been looking for years. It's a classic store, so, you know, all the best to them, everybody that works there, the owners, and hopefully this is partially on their own.
If it's been around 35 years, like maybe it's time for them to cash in their chips. That is, thinking about it, that is actually like the new sort of like life landmark that I've hit at this point. Is I'm now old enough to be like my parents and say, you know, that business was way better when the original owners owned it, but when they gave it to their kids, it turned to shit. So maybe they're just preventing this thing from being able to be turned to shit by, you know, giving it to other hands. Yeah,
could be. And they've talked about, you know, having their basically clearing out sale, I think, is starting this week. So, you know, people in that area, man, go give those guys some money and get something cool. I drove to Florida last year, and I was hitting different old comic book stores, you know, because like now you're aware of shops. I follow them on various social media, so I know about like Criminal in Atlanta, for example. That was a store I got to go to last year for the first time.
Big supporters of our work.
Yeah, and great store. And another one of those stores that has a long history. And so several of the stores that I found, there was one in Florida, I think it was like I'm going to forget the name now, Green Machine or something like that. And these are stores that I identify as similar to Ides, which is the local Pittsburgh store for people unfamiliar with it, in that there's a model of stores that emerged in the 80s that were like music, comics, maybe movies, and Criminal has some of that. And the store in Florida had that.
It's called Criminal Records.
Yeah.
That's the name of the store.
Yeah, exactly. And I appreciate these stores because like those are the kind of stores I first found when I started, being able to drive to comic book stores and really looking for where can I get comics. That's what stores looked like. It would have been in the maybe mid-90s that I was finding these places, and a lot of them had that legacy. They had started in the 80s, and that was the blueprint. You can almost date stores to kind of like what do they carry, what do they look like, how are they designed, to almost when they started. And it's sad to see some of these 80s stores, getting older and moving on in some cases. So St. Mark's is an iconic one.
Rest in peace. Project updates. You haven't been back long. We're recording this on a Thursday. You had about 70 pages to go on episode 1. Where are you at right now with Plain Jane's?
I have done 5 pages since I've been back. Got back late Sunday night. Did pretty well the first couple of days back. Yesterday hit a little bit of a wall. So my pace is, I'm shooting for about 10 pages a week. One of the people that I got to meet and hang out with some in Angoulême is my editor from Little Brown. It's the first time I've met her in person.
Isn't that funny how that works? Where you're working with people who, she's 5 hours away from us right this very minute, but you meet them across the world.
Yes, but it was good to actually, it's always good to actually sit down in person, at least in my experience. So we talked about the book. Schedule-wise, it's good. The deadline that I thought I had is actually later, which is a nice thing. How often does that happen?
I know you were stressing about that a little bit.
But I still plan to hit my original deadline, and I'm still in good shape. I was thinking that I would get back from Angoulême basically at the beginning of February. And, so I'm able to get probably 6 pages done extra in what was left of January that I didn't account for. So I may even be a little bit ahead of schedule.
A couple studious Kayfabers out there have made me aware that there is an Amazon entry for I'm going to have 2 major books come out this year. X-Men Grand Design Extinction. I talked about that last week, was able to show off the cover last week. That finally is up on Amazon. But there's another book that I have coming out scheduled for October. The Extinction trade paperback is scheduled for August. We haven't made the official announcement yet. You know how sometimes things get staggered?
Yes.
But if you want to do some Googling and some sleuth work, you will find an entry. You won't find the cover's not up there yet, but you will find an entry for another book that I have coming out in October that I'm very, very, very excited about. Right now, with X-Men Grand Design, I have 20 pages to go. I drew 221 pages of that son of a bitch. 20 pages to go, man. Like, the light is at the end of the tunnel,
yes.
And I get to complete this thing within, at most, 10 weeks, if I just do 2 pages per week, obviously. But, like, I'm going to try to get at least 3. Got 3 pages done last week. The cool thing about doing this X-Men project is that it buys me time to begin working on some other things. I have 4 major ideas that I want to explore, and I kind of plan on hitting the ground running off the bat. Like finish up X-Men, do some coloring for the trade paperback, take my victory lap, and then sit my ass back down and begin the writing process. I discovered a couple more master classes that I've just been listening to in the background, but there were with writers I respect less. Like one is James Patterson, and even the titles of each of the sections is antithetical to David Mamet and Aaron Sorkin and Alan Moore. In fact, there's like plot, working with a ghostwriter. It's like he's so out of like anyone else's range that this is what he's presenting you is stuff that you will never have to concern yourself with.
That's a funny skill for like an aspiring writer. Tell me how I handle my ghostwriter again.
Right. And the one that might have value really is like the marketing, because that guy, first off, of course, he has got a factory and he pumps out books every month in every class and genre. Like I have nieces and nephews who have January birthdays, so I get them like the fun present during Christmas, and I get them literary presents. Like I get them books for their birthday. So I'm in the bookstore, and I was taking a look in the little kids section, and there's James Patterson children's books. The other one is Dan Brown, How to Write Mystery or something like that. Very well spoken, but I read those books, you know what I'm saying? And I see why my mom likes them. They're just totally consumable, like candy.
Yeah, I listened to the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah. Every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. It actually reminded me of like the old like 1920s, 30s like serials. You know, like the Crimson Ghost or like the old Captain Flash Gordon, where it's like every chapter ends with a fucking cliffhanger and then it resolves itself really easy. On like the Aaron Sorkin masterclass, he talks about you want to avoid and then they emerged from the whale scenario, which there was a writer who was talking about when he went to go watch serials, and they would end on the cliffhanger, and it would be some guy falls down a well, so you have to come back the next week to see how he was saved or escaped from the thing, and the episode will begin with once emerged from the well. And
I feel like there's quite a few comics that you have used that trope over the years.
Almost every mainstream comic that came out on like a serialized like monthly basis. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. TV season enders back in the day, before peak TV. It'd be, who shot this character? Oh, it was a dream.
And then he woke up, man. Or the entire hospital was inside of a snow globe. You remember that one?
Yes.
A fever dream of some young lad.
I've continued listening to the Betsphere.
I listened to that, and I fell down a rabbit hole after you mentioned it because I edited the episode. I'm like, let me watch listen to this Betsphere thing.
Yes.
And then I started reading articles, and then I started finding other stuff because it's clearly a thing. And there's a lot of material about it.
Well, the show started out, it was going to be a two-parter, and now they're up to part 4 is next week. It keeps expanding.
Did they actually get a hold of the actual people who had this damn thing?
Yes, and it's fascinating stories. Like, it's hard not to listen and think, this is a great storyteller that has them on the hook. Because the stories are fascinating. They seem legit. They seem like they're heavily into research, the guys who put the show together. But it's a fantastic story. So I'm eager to kind of reach the conclusion and see what ended up happening with the sphere itself, because I don't believe they have possession of it anymore.
Right.
They told one story where some guys showed up that paid policemen $1,000 to bring them to the house and then offered on the spot $750,000 cash for the thing. And they had accents.
Oh, man.
Yeah, once it got a little bit of media coverage, it sort of took off, and it started to freak them out at that point. People breaking into the house, it was a pretty isolated location where they lived. So once you start getting like weirdos showing up,
I just like that's the part that they start getting freaked out. Not at the fact that like when they're having conversation, they start to play music, that the ball is going like this on the fucking table, and when they turn it off, it stops. Yeah. That doesn't freak them out. Wouldn't you?
I think you're right about that.
I would burn that thing at the stake, and I would get it as far away from me as possible if that occurred.
They haven't been able to verify this story, but they heard a story of another one of these balls that at some point just shot through the roof of the house where it was at. Like, that was it. That was the last time they saw it. But they haven't confirmed that story. That's kind of a urban legend type bit.
I recently have for the Ed Piskor completist out there. There's this book, Ink and Anguish, a Jay Lynch anthology that has come out, and in the back of the book, there's about 17 pages of work that I collaborated with Jay Lynch on. Whenever I got started in comics, there were still anthologies that were being put out by every small press publisher. And I would submit 5-page stories, 4-page stories to all of these anthologies and get routinely rejected with good cause. The strips, looking back, they were not that good, and I would be very embarrassed if there were a lot of those in circulation. But I still spent a lot of time on those pages, and I had to try to get some value out of them. So I began combing the letters columns, because this is pre-MySpace, this is pre-website for the most part, and finding the addresses of cartoonists that I really liked, and I would make Xeroxes and send the strips off to them just for some kind of feedback. Like the first real landmarks of like my up-and-coming thing was just getting actual feedback from cartoonists that I really liked. Even if they were like, this is utter shit, it at least started the ball running.
Did anybody send you "This is utter shit"? Did you send it to Alex Toad? He's famous for sending that type of feedback. You know, lots of people have those notes. I think Steve Rude received some critical feedback from him.
He surely did. I got roasted by people who I've become friends with. You can't take it personally.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's something that a lot of people could take to heart, because I see them, they have Kool-Aid running through their veins, man. Don't bring the pages, man, if you don't want honest feedback. Like, I dig that your mom likes it, but whatever.
Sound like Peter David now.
Yeah. But you know, Pete Bagg roasted me. Rick Altergott roasted me. A lot of people roasted me. But in those initial blasts, I first got contacted by Jay Lynch, who I discovered from comics by Les Daniels, the old book that I would get at the Homestead Library routinely. He had work in Help, and he was a pioneer of underground comics. And then days later is when I received the call from Harvey Pekar about, like, hey, well, you want to draw some American Splendor strips? In the time it took for Harvey to write the American Splendor stuff, I collaborated with Jay Lynch on this comic that we were going to be called, like, the anthology is called Ink and Anguish, and that was going to be the title of our comic book. He basically did these very tight roughs that were 100% publishable as comics in and of themselves, and I told him so. But if you know Jay Lynch's work, it's very rigorous and meticulous, and he spends a lot of time, and that work that he sent me to work from, his scripts, were not suitable for print at that point, by his lights.
That's so interesting.
So he, gave those pages to a fucking 21-year-old schmuck who just jumped at the chance. And, looking back, like, I did not do him a service. Like I was a knucklehead. I totally appreciate the opportunity. And work begats work. So by doing the work that I did for him, it made the work sharper for my American Splendor stuff, which is also kind of crappy. But I was young and just figuring things out. I was learning on the page in front of you instead of, like, wood shedding in my mom's house.
You have to do that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how prepared you think you are. Those early pages are going to be shit, and they kind of have to be.
I wish I was smart enough to have a nom de plume, Jim. No? Nothing more?
No. Nothing to add to that.
Jay and I, we did 17 pages of comics, and basically what these comics are, he described them to me as two-fisted cartoonist stories, because he would meet cartoonists. He would go to MoCA, he's a New York guy, and he would meet the cartoonists that came, like, right past, like, the Klaus Ware generation, like, maybe slightly older than you, younger than the Klaus crew. Klaus and Chris Ware, they damaged a generation by being as self-effacing as they were, and a bunch of cartoonists were like, oh, so if Chris Ware and Charles Burns and Dan Klaus, they don't like their own work, so I surely can't. A lot of depression and such in amongst that generation, man. It's almost like we lost a generation of cartoonists by people who just beat themselves to shit. And basically, Jay Lynch is like, you're all a bunch of bitch-ass pussies. We were far fucking cooler than you, and here's why. And that's what these comics are. You know what I'm saying? Like, just him kind of like, it's almost the opposite of, like, a Harvey Pekar story, where Harvey is, like, the sort of antagonist as well as a protagonist or whatever. Like, he's not afraid to let himself be looked at in a negative light. The Jay Lynch stuff is a little bit more, I wouldn't say hyperbolic, but you're seeing curated, chosen moments that are to an ends.
Right. I'm trying to think of his age. Would he have been part of the greatest generation? The following generation?
He was like, so it would be like 40, like born in the 40s probably.
Yeah, so he would have been like the children of the greatest generation.
Yeah. Yeah, the greatest generation is World War II, right?
Right.
He's not that. Definitely not. Like when my dad, who's 72, when my dad was beating up long hair hippies, now Jay Lynch isn't a hippie, but my dad would have fucked up Jay Lynch, is what I'm saying. So, like, they came around at the same time.
That's funny.
It's like my dad was a cusp baby boomer, like one of the first.
I don't think my dad would have been too impressed with any cartoonists.
Right. And it's like how I'm like the cusp of millennial type shit, and I am like, yeah, you have Kool-Aid running through your veins, man.
Tomorrow's my birthday.
You know what I love about you, Jim?
That's how I know it was February 1st when you put me on the spot.
That's awesome. What I love about you is we've been friends for a really long time, and we never get into that. Like whenever we hang out, it's all comics all the time. And this is the first I've known that is your birthday, and for as long as I've known you.
Oh, well.
It took me 5 years to find out your wife's
Cat's out of
name.
the bag now. It took years and years before Chris Pitzer and I were like friends. Like once we were working together, it was like, I don't know if we can be friends. We have a professional relationship.
That's Jim Rugg for you. You have any plans, man?
Probably work about 6 hours in the morning, and then I'm going to go see a documentary about some guy who climbed Half Dome in Yosemite, free climbed it. I think he's the first guy to do it. It's playing on an IMAX screen, so I think it'll look really nice. Yeah, when I was younger, I drove cross-country, and Yosemite was one of my favorite places, so I think it'll look good on a giant screen. And then I think I have a lead on some quarter boxes, so that might be after the fact.
Yeah.
We'll see.
You won't share that information with me?
I'm not sure if it's true or not. If I come back with any, I'll let you know.
All right, this wraps up another week's Kayfabe Shoot, man. I'm Ed Piscor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
We have comics to draw. Remember, read more comics.
This is the Comics Journal, number 152, part 2.
If you guys didn't get enough of that 3-hour episode from last week, man, we have another at least hour for you to go.
This episode will be getting into Evan Dorkin, Alan Moore, David Mazzucchelli, and Chris Claremont interviews.
I have more respect for the wrestler's Sting than the musician's Sting.
And one of the examples that he cites is Destroy, the Scott McCloud book, as being kind of like the apex of that direction. You know, like what could be more... How much further could you take this notion? So Destroy is the loudest comic book in the universe.
Gary sends him Youngblood 1, Spawn 1, and I believe Savage Dragon number 1. And then Alan Moore wrote this amazing little manifesto.